Okay, hello everybody. It's always slightly daunting to be first up, especially when you're told don't make any glaring errors. So my name is Mike Hatrick. As you can see from the background, I'm innovation manager for a company called Swisslog, but you can probably tell I'm not from Switzerland by the way I talk. Innovation manager means that my job is not to be the innovator, it's to try and help make innovation happen. And the nature of my job, therefore, is that I've seen quite a lot of pretty fun, interesting and unexpected things happen through my career. I've only been doing the job with Swisslog for about 9 months, and before that, I was in aerospace for nearly 20 years, so I'll be talking a bit about that as well. Anyway, as you can see, the title of the talk is Tales of the Unexpected, and I'm going to reveal that to you through the course of telling 4 stories. And to try and maintain some element of surprise, I'm not going to talk too much more about the introduction, so let's get started. The first story is called The Little Black Book. Now, I'm talking to an audience who I guess are nearly all from the hospitality industry, and I wonder how often do you get asked by your customer, can I bring my racehorse along? Nobody's jumping up to say they do, but I'm sure some of you have at some stage. Anyway, it might surprise you to hear that towards the end of my career in aerospace, somebody in a project team that I worked with asked exactly this question. And in fact, they went on to say, hey, maybe we should be offering business jets, where the wealthy owner of the jet can bring their racehorse, their prized possession, on board. And actually, by the way, the racehorse probably is worth more than the airplane. Okay, so when this was suggested, there was quite a lot of laughter, like we just heard. But the laughter subsided when one of the experts in the team said, well, you know, actually, that's a pretty interesting idea. And of course, horses have been flying in airplanes for a long time. Indeed, some airlines offer it today. But not so many, and as you can see from this horse, which isn't looking particularly happy, it isn't very luxurious surroundings, and they get loaded on in a fairly ignominious way. And it's been happening for a long time. This horse looks a little bit happier, probably because he's getting off the airplane. But anyway, actually, this started generating some momentum, and it went on to be included in a package of ideas that the team went on to consider what should the business jet of the future be. But that's actually not so much the surprising part of this story. The surprising part is where the idea came from. It was suggested not by somebody from within the project team, but by somebody who submitted the idea online through an online platform that we were using. And not only that, but this guy sat 3,000 miles away from the project team, who were in Montreal. He was in Ireland. He's a guy who worked in IT, and he's a guy that comes to work wearing a bushwhacker hat. Not the kind of guy that typically gets invited to be part of these teams, perhaps, especially in more formal organizations. So everybody was a bit surprised when this idea came in, but I wasn't actually. And the reason was that we had launched this platform about 2 years before, and very shortly after we launched it, I got a call from a friend of mine in IT, a guy who'd actually helped me set it up. And he said, will you hear this, Mike? The guy sitting opposite me, he sat opposite me for 10 years. It's the guy with the hat. And shortly after we launched, he reached under his desk and lifted out a little black book, started paging through it, and then was furiously typing into the computer. So my friend Andy was intrigued. He couldn't hold himself back, said, hey, what are you doing? And he said, this little black book I've had for the 20 years I've been with this organization, and every time I saw something that I thought could or should be better, I wrote it in my book. And he hadn't shown it to anybody in 20 years. The only reason he now felt it was the right time was he had this online tool. He felt safe to do it there, and he became one of our biggest users. Over 2 years, he submitted 30 ideas. He commented on about 60, and 11 of his ideas were chosen to be implemented by his peers. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure those peers would never have asked him. So I think that's a pretty cool and unexpected story. And moving on to story 2. Call this the SWAT team. Now, whenever we first started experimenting with this approach, I'm not sure if there are any Americans in the room who'll understand SWAT team more, but the SWAT team probably conjures up an image something like this. And this is kind of what we pictured, maybe not with the rifles, but with highly trained, highly skilled individuals that we would use for problem solving. And it evolved a little bit as we experimented with the approach, which is what I'll tell now. Because one of the last projects that we used this approach on, before I left my previous company, was looking at cost reduction. And specifically, we were trying to do cost reduction on a very high-cost component right in the middle of the airplane. So I don't want to get too technical, but here's an airplane. And the auxiliary fuel tank, which was the part that we were talking about, was located in this area here, the belly fairing. Now, aircraft are big, complicated things, and indeed this part of the aircraft is particularly complicated. And that's part of the reason why nobody had ever really wanted to go and try and do change here. It was a bit risky, it was a bit complicated. So this was a bit of a tough nut to crack, hence we called in the SWAT team. They came back with a bunch of pretty compelling proposals and actually made a proposal to completely delete the component. And they had good reasons why that was going to be possible. So pretty good result. And maybe you're starting to form an opinion of, well, geez, these guys must be amazing. What do they look like? Maybe something like this. Well, that wasn't quite the case. There were actually 5 people who, before we started the project, knew nothing about the problem. In fact, that's what we put in the requirements when we asked for volunteers. We got 10 volunteers, we selected 5, and we did that by using some innovator profiling and also just their level of enthusiasm. And we set them off to the task. I must admit, I did get a bit worried. A couple of days before we launched this particular project, the chief engineer on the program actually went into writing to complain and protest that we were wasting money putting people onto this project, people who knew nothing about it, people who were inexperienced, and they were dealing with a complicated and sensitive item. So what do you think that chief engineer thought or said after he heard the results? He said at the end of the meeting, I'm not going to eat my hat. Pretty good result. But we start to think deeper into kind of what might be a surprising result here. Why did it happen? And I think typically when we're faced with a big problem, a complicated problem, something we think we can't solve, we usually go to the usual suspects. Highly experienced people, trusted individuals. And do they solve the problem? Probably. But do they solve the problem in a creative and innovative manner? Probably not, actually, because these people are busy. These people are moving fast. When you ask them their opinion on something, they often give it very quick. They come to a decision based on their broad scope of experience. What we had this time was a group of people, almost childlike, although they were a little bit older, but 5 pairs of fresh eyes. And they were able to look and see detail in this problem that nobody else had noticed. And they had no ties to this. They were prepared to take the risk with their ideas and say, this is what we should do. Okay, story number 3. I should run a competition to see if you can guess what the story is. All right, I call this one Mountaineering, which is apt considering where we're presenting today. Starting with a blank sheet of paper, if I was to ask you all, give me an idea of what the game-changing business jet of 2020 might be. Does anybody have a view? Call something out. It's a tough question, right? What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Fuel-free.
Fuel-free, okay, like an eco-jet, something like that. Like the Toyota Prius of the skies. Yeah, that's the kind of thing people talk about. And some of the other ideas people think of, here's something that looks like a pretty pleasant flying experience. Maybe it's some sort of personal flying saucer. Supersonic is what people often say. Awesome interior, fantastic flying experience. Or maybe it's some sort of personal jetpack. And this is Switzerland's own Yves Rossi, who I think this picture is him flying over Lake Geneva on his jet-powered wings. Now, this is exactly the question that a project team that I worked with were given. Come up with the game-changing business jet of 2020. And what they did was they thought about what it was going to be like to fly, what it was going to be like to fly in, what it was going to be like to own. All sounds sensible, right? But maybe it would surprise you to hear that it took them 6 months to get to that point in terms of their thought process. So why is that? Well, quite often when people, certainly in my experience, are given a big, meaty, scary problem like this, or challenge, they set off very enthusiastically. Nice stroll through the mountains. But then inevitably, the path gets steeper. And certainly some take the path less traveled and strive on. But actually, most of us end up walking through the leafy glade and having a nice Sunday stroll. And inevitably what happens is they keep walking and they keep walking until they're back to their comfort zone. In other words, a safe place to play. And that's exactly what happened with this team. These guys were the elite in the organization. But nevertheless, faced with this big problem, they actually retreated back and did what they were used to doing, which was incremental innovation. A little bit faster, a little bit higher, a little bit more fuel efficient, a little bit further. And what do we do to change it? Well, back to the mountain analogy. We brought in a Sherpa, not actually literally, but we brought in somebody to help, and help to lead them out of that comfort zone. We ran innovation workshops through the course of a week, only 1.5 hours a day, and all we did was facilitate. And the team self-realized that, hang on a minute, we've been working 6 months and we're actually almost working individually. We're doing the thing that we feel comfortable with, and we've forgotten that actually we're designing for the human. And that's when they came back to thinking, actually, this is about comfort. It's about creating some sort of seamless journey. It's about not having to wait in the airport. Those were the things that they started thinking about, not just a little bit faster. And they proceeded to climb the summit as a team this time. So this is still work in progress. I'm not sure exactly what aircraft we'll see flying over the peaks of our mountains in the future. But I'm sure it will have a wow factor, perhaps even for the horse. Okay, final story number 4. I call this one total immersion. As I mentioned at the start, I'm innovation manager for Swisslog, and what we do is basically move stuff around for companies in a warehouse, in a distribution center. And I was a little bit surprised and almost a little bit embarrassed a few months ago when I heard from our office in New Zealand that they had won an innovation award from one of their customers. And it was embarrassing because I hadn't heard anything about this. I was obviously eager to find out what it was, and I listened to a presentation where they told me about the design, about the technology, about the solution that had so pleased the customer. And I listened and I thought, okay, new technology, very nice. New approach, very nice. Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. But I wasn't getting the wow factor. And it wasn't until I heard somebody else from the team present it in a different way a week later, that's when I got the wow factor. Because what he told me, very matter of fact, is, oh yeah, our Swisslog engineers rode in the trucks, the Coke trucks, as they delivered the product to the stores. And that's where they found out all the problems that the delivery guys had in the way the products were packaged, the way they were put onto the pallets. They learned the customer pains. And then they started thinking of some ideas. They started thinking of ideas about how to pack the truck differently, how to package it on the pallets differently, and they experimented with it. They actually tried it out again on the trucks, and they found that the guys on the trucks went, hey, this solves all our problems. So the Swisslog guys realized they were onto something, and they took that build and worked it backwards through the design. And this may sound like common sense, and actually it kind of is. But the point is, these guys went the extra hurdle. They made the effort to get onto these trucks, to probably get up early in the morning and spend time with the customer. So now I got the wow factor, and I also saw why the customer did as well. And I sat back with a smile on my face thinking, you know what's actually quite cool here? It's actually quite cool that I didn't know about this before, because it means other people in Swisslog are following, if you like, the innovation textbook. We've all heard stories about design thinking and designing for the customer. Well, here was a great example. I also had a smile on my face because it reminded me of how my journey started into the world of innovation management. And it started about 10 years ago, 2001, when I was standing in London receiving this certificate. This isn't actually my living room. I received this certificate standing on a stage, something like this, from Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. And it was to confirm that our team were finalists in the McRobert Award for Innovation in Engineering. So while the cameras were flashing, the only thing I could think of was not what an awesome thing it was, but all I could think of was, how did this happen? Because I didn't remember, through the whole 5 years previous, myself or any of my team ever using the word innovation. We didn't set out to be innovative. And as I left this forum and went away, I really kind of went on a bit of a personal mission to find out what is it that made this happen. And I realized that without knowing it, we had also followed the innovation textbook. We had embedded ourselves deeply with the customer. We'd got out in the field, we'd looked around, we'd really learned the customer's pains. And we felt some ownership of those and an ownership to solve them. And I realized myself with kind of an epiphany that, wow, why can't it be like this all the time? And in fact, that's what I want to do. I want to be a person who tries to make it happen all the time. To kind of wrap the talk up then, the last few minutes, bring it all together, I'll try and describe my view of what are the key aspects on my pinboard here of what makes a sustainable innovation environment. And I think this is applicable to any industry. It's really about culture. The first one, I think you have to start with customer-driven innovation. The example of Swisslog with Coca-Cola Amatil describes that quite well, I think. The next one is, once you have that, then you need to achieve some level of organizational clarity. Why innovate? What kinds of innovation? And how to innovate? The story about the game changer business jet illustrates that actually, in that case, the team went far too quickly into the how. How should we do this? How should we do this? How should we do this? Without really thinking, why are we doing it in the first place? And what kind of innovation are we going after? The third one, then, is getting people engaged. Some of the stories I've told have been ways to get people engaged. Ask for some volunteers. Throw them on a problem. That was the SWAT team. And actually, I think if you really want to engage a large number of people and create this knock-on effect of creativity happening, then you need diverse approaches. Think back to the guy in the bushwhacker hat. 20 years, he'd recorded stuff in that book. But it was only when we provided some sort of online forum that he felt safe, that he could engage and provide his creativity and his ideas. And my experience is, if you do all that, you're doing quite well, because actually what starts happening for free is you generate flow. The ideas start coming. The pipeline starts filling up, and we've all heard the term, the best way to get good ideas is to get lots of ideas. So generate that flow. But what's really cool, on top of all of this, is that once you've done all of this and got the people engaged, for me, what it means is really one sentence, and that is that people now feel they have permission to innovate. And once they have permission to innovate, well, we can't be too sure what's going to happen. Unexpected things start happening. And as the innovation manager, I've learned to expect the unexpected. Be ready for it, nurture it, because actually the unexpected is often the biggest and the best. So thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Hatrick.